Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groome, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. This is Kevin Groome with the Creative Operations Podcast, and I'm excited today to have as our guest Peter Cronin of We Are Acuity. We Are Acuity is an agency based in the UK that has a particular specialty in working with major brands that are marketing through their local network. So we have lots we want to talk about today, both from a strategy and a creative point of view, but also from the mechanics of what We Are Acuity likes to refer to as local marketing hubs. So Peter, thank you, first of all, for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Great to chat with you again, Kevin.
You bet. Now, tell us, the audience would be fascinated to hear a little bit about your journey and We Are Acuity's journey into this very, specific space where brands are trying to market through their local networks. Tell us a little bit about your guys' journey in that space.
Okay. So we started off in 1998, so, quite a long time ago. I think back then we might have had one email account in the whole business and got very excited when we heard a ping. So yeah, it was a slightly different world back then. But we started off working with some automotive brands that worked with a distributed network. We didn't particularly know those terms at the time, but we got very involved in helping those local partners, they're franchised in the UK, with their marketing basically. And it was very much about taking centralized brand campaign assets and making them available to that network. Those of you who are old enough to remember, we used to have something called bromides at the time. Bromide was the black and white artwork for the local press. We used to create those once a quarter and literally post them out to the local branches for them to then distribute to the local newspapers. And that was kind of it, really. It was local press and probably local radio, and that was about as far as it went. Fast forward 24 years, and we're still working with that same client as one of our clients. But obviously, we've had an explosion in the number of different channels that are available, and also the technology, the ability to very much sort of personalize the messaging and to have a number of different touch points with the customer in their buying journey, really.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating that you just taught me a new term, bromides. And back in the day over here, we called them ad slicks. And they were a laborious thing to create. So the fact that those are gone, I'm sure neither you nor I miss them very much. Based on the time you guys have spent in this world with local marketers, I wanted to ask you about that classical pendulum between brand and direct, where we would see sort of the promotional aspect begin to hold sway, and then we would swing back to brand awareness. How have you seen that pendulum swinging in recent years, with brands and particularly through their local and distributed networks? Is branding becoming more important because the internet has made sure your competition is never more than a click away, or has kind of the promotional end of things really begun to take hold and hold sway?
Okay. Well, I did prepare some thoughts on that, actually, because I thought it was a really interesting question. I think when we started out, particularly in the space we were in, there was often a bit of a conflict between the local partner, the local retailer as a brand, and then the products that they were selling. And there was often a bit of sort of push-pull between those as to who was more important. Did the customer come to Dave's store because they liked Dave and they trusted him, or did they go to Dave's store to buy, Bob's cereal because they liked Bob's cereal? And this was a sort of an ongoing thing that was happening, or has been happening over the last sort of 20 years, really. I think that, the world that we live in, the brands are key, and they're the ones that do the big above the line brand building sort of messaging and get the interest in the products. But I think equally, the local store has a really important part to play in building that local relationship, helping the customer to discover products, interact with them and feel them. So, online is very much there when it comes to commodity. And dare I say, Amazon is fantastic if you just want that repeat purchase, where you're not particularly connected, with the brand. But when it comes to building longer term relationships with brands, then I think that local experience is absolutely key. And what we're seeing now is this sort of blended retail, whereby local physical retail is being complemented by a digital experience to enhance it in some way, either through convenience or bringing a product to life or helping demonstrate the product better. And that to us is the ideal sort of situation, really.
So really a balance, which is, I would love to see that pendulum stop swinging, because it seems to me both sides are super important. And the local marketer can play such a critical role in helping us keep that kind of balanced approach. So it's great insight. It's interesting that you had mentioned 1998. That was actually the very same year over here that we started building our first, what you guys call, local marketing hub. And so you've been around this local marketing hub, and that's a phrase I know you guys have really tried to centralize around or concentrate messaging around. I wanted to talk about some of the jargon that you guys mentioned has arisen in the category. Why do you think it is that it's so hard to describe this space, and you hear so many different terms used about it, when really it's such a widespread need and such a common kind of problem to solve?
Well, that's a good question. It's quite a tough question, I guess. I think human beings like to, make things complex. We've seen it. I'm showing my age again, going back to the days of VHS and Betamax, CDs and mini discs. There's always somebody who's got something that wants to give it a name. And I think that's why we picked that term local marketing hub, because it over here we have a phrase, it does what it says on the tin. And we felt that, if you break it down to its simplicity, to its simplest form, that is what it is. You're creating a portal that allows local partners to come and self-service their own local marketing, but obviously based on centralized templates, best practice approaches, and brand consistency.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great and simple term. I think that we're all beginning to gravitate toward that. Actually, I think I saw Forrester Research starting to use that term, a little bit more commonly in their literature.
I'm sure we have an influence.
Yeah, I think you're having an impact, which is good. Simplifying things. So let me turn to that notion of local marketing hubs, because again, you guys have some great insights. And I want to recommend everybody, you should take a look at this white paper that We Are Acuity has put out on local marketing hubs, not just the technology, but the human factor, which I've always found really fascinating aspect to this business. But I wanted to ask you, the question about senior management. Somewhere in that white paper, relatively early on, you mentioned that it's sometimes hard to get those senior brand leaders to really pay attention to the perspective or perhaps the plight of the local marketer. How do you go about getting that perspective to really become a priority at that brand level? What are the hurdles and how do you overcome them?
I think the sort of the go-to has obviously been the sort of the big glamorous TV ads and all of that sort of lovely stuff that the big network agencies are working on, and of course those do a really important role. If you're spending X number of billions of dollars or pounds on a TV ad, then you want to make sure that you get that right. And that's where your attention is. But the challenge is if your local partner in the local store is having to screen grab your TV ads and photocopy it and stick it in the window of the store, then that is kind of undoing all of that great brand work that you're doing and is distressing the brand. So I think, the days of seeing local and national as distinctly separate things really is gone. And you've got to make sure that all of those multiple touch points that the customer has with your brand are consistent. And it's about building trust. I mean, one of the things you were talking about, the importance of brands, and I just did a bit of sort of research before the call, was talking about Generation Z, which is obviously very much the focus at the moment. But I think this carries true across a lot of different demographics. But people want to, make a decision based on trust with the brand. And the way you build trust is being consistent and talking not just about your products, but about your purpose, really. These days with sustainability and all of these kind of things, it's more than just selling products and making profit. So you want to be consistent at all of those different touch points with the customer. And that's, we feel, where local marketing is, plays a really important role, really.
That's great to hear. The phrase that you used, above the line, brought to mind for me that distinction between brand advertising and local advertising, and the fact that above the line and below the line, which used to be quite separate, are now really becoming unified. And so for senior management to think about that entire life cycle of an asset. In our business at Campaign Drive and Pike & Nine, we often measure the reuse of assets and all the different ways they might be reused so that we can really start to speak to return on creative investment. And I think that perspective, that blending of those two things to look at the overall life cycle of an asset and the return that it produced for the business is something that senior management starts to look at, not just because it's compelling, but also because it's measurable, which I think is a great way to get their attention. Let me turn for a second to another point that you guys had made in your white paper. And, in preparing for this, I found it quite educational. But you guys talk a little bit about the difficulty of templating. It sounds easy. And to a designer, it might sound so easy as to be a little bit suspect, right? Is the brand really going to use templates to deploy itself? But you make a really good point that templating isn't so easy. The installation of templates often leads customers into needing to rely either on a software vendor or on some other mechanism just to get templates in the system. Can you talk a little bit about what has driven in the past that complexity? And do you see that starting to get ironed out a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably in the early days, and perhaps with some of the the starter sort of platforms, local marketing hubs that were out there, they weren't that accessible as far as understanding how to build templates and sort of make the most of them. And I think that has kind of been democratized in sort of recent years, really. So they have been, become a lot easier for people to have access to those. Because one of the challenges you would find is if you've sold in a platform, and to be honest, you guys probably remember this from, 10, 15 years ago, was that you want the brand to use the local marketing hub as much as possible. But if there's a cost associated every time you want to make changes to templates and things like that can become a bit of a burden and can become a bit prohibitive. So the reality is that I think the software providers, as well as the agencies, have realized that the more usage you get out of the platform, the better it is for everybody at the end of the day. You can have the best system in the world, but if it's sitting there like a white elephant, and nobody's using it, then you're kind of just wasting your money, really.
It's interesting. We measure both the access to the system, so kind of the classic web statistics, but we also look at documents generated and assets downloaded. And more these days, we're beginning to see that health really comes from kind of a balance of static assets that have been delivered so that folks can pick them up and go in seconds, literally, but balance that with dynamic document generation. So there's a little bit of customizing going on. And every brand seems to find its own balance for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the key, and I think you guys mentioned this in that white paper, is overall adoption is something you want to keep your finger on the pulse of month after month after month, because that's really where you're going to see that return on investment. Let's talk a little bit about the future. So you guys have been at this for a while. We've been at it about the same amount of time. But when you look at the future of local marketing hubs, what do you see in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 3? What lies ahead for us?
I think there was, again, I spent a bit of time sort of thinking about this before the call, really. So I think there's probably a couple of things that kind of stand out to me. Obviously, the last couple of years have been unprecedented, and hopefully it isn't going to be something that comes around again too soon. But it did force a huge number of customers online, and those might have been customers that wouldn't naturally have gone online before, but it's kind of forced a behavioral change. The positives out of that is that as we're now moving back to normality and things have opened up again, is that those customers are, some of their learned behaviors and ways of doing things digitally, they're sticking with, because they can now see the sort of benefits that it brings to them. So what I think we see that means is that the whole world of commerce in whatever sector is much more blended than it was before. And we think that is a great thing, really. That is, I think, as we said, it kind of augments the physical experience to add that convenience and special experiences that you can kind of get through digital. And that's how we see the future of retail. I mean, if you look at the likes of Amazon, who are doing a lot of investigations around what they call digital bricks, which is, blending physical retail with digital assets. They're just trialing their fashion store at the moment, using QR codes to deliver not just a single product, but a whole outfit. So the idea is bringing some of the sort of technology and thinking that you would get with merchandising online in an online environment, bringing that much more into the physical world to help upsell additional products and features and services and things like that, really. So I think that's a great opportunity, this new blended world. But what it is going to mean is that the marketing maturity, particularly in the digital space of local partners, needs to move quickly. And that's an area that brands really have not invested in for a long time. I mean, there's been certain elements of sort of digitization that we've been pushing, and I've looked back for maybe sort of 5 years or so. We've been banging on the door with certain clients saying, look, this is going to be something we need to do. And as soon as once the pandemic came, suddenly they were like, yeah, let's do it, So it's forced a change, but there's a lot to do. The marketing maturity of a lot of retailer networks, whether they're franchises or venues or branches or whatever, it's still needs to improve significantly. The good news is that the appetite is out there. I think most local partners now know that they need to be doing better, whether it's around online search or business listings, maps, digital displays, social media, these kind of things. They know that they need to do better, and they know that there's a huge opportunity for them to do that. But brands need to start to invest in making that happen. And the savvy brands are are winning, but the danger is that those that take their eye off this ball are going to get left behind, really. So that's, I think, one of the big sort of trends, more to do with this blended retail, but an upshift in the digital marketing maturity of local partners. The second thing, which has come out of the pandemic, which I think is a real silver lining, is the fact that people have really started to appreciate local. We've all spent a lot of time forced to stay local. And I think what a lot of people have done is discovered local communities, local resources, local assets. And I think a lot of us are now starting to appreciate stuff that we maybe took for granted before. People's, mindsets have sort of shifted in their behaviors, and they're now much more connected with those local communities. Nextdoor, which is the sort of hyper-social network, I think it's originated in the States, but they found found that 2/3 of people now shop more locally than they did 2 years ago. So that's great for the little, corner stores. I think you guys call it the mamas and papas stores. But what about bigger brands? How do they become more relevant and more connected to those local communities, really? So there are a lot of savvy brands out there that have switched onto this, and they're engaging with local audiences and become very much relevant in those local communities to achieve success. But more brands could be doing that. And, the way they do that is get to know local communities and treating each community slightly differently, which will build that goodwill. A brand really, I don't feel should try and talk to the same to everybody across a country. We have different communities, different ethnicities, different religions, all sorts of different things that create different communities. And each of those communities need to be spoken to in a way that is unique to them if you want to really engage with them and feel relevant. So the good news is the tools are there. A local marketing hub allows you to do that. Things like dynamic digital creative make that available to people. So these are all opportunities that have been proven by the savvy brands, but everyone else needs to get on board, really, and the opportunities are enormous.
It's interesting, those two themes, when you put them together, we might summarize them as saying brands do need to work hard to distribute not just marketing assets, but marketing intelligence and marketing skills. They need to deploy those out to the local marketers. And at the same time, this communication really needs to be two-way, so that they can learn from the local marketers what makes those local communities unique, and then leverage those things together with the brand.
Absolutely.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, and that was really, very much, my next point is that, if you're a brand that sells through a network of local partners, you've got a huge resource out there of expertise and intelligence and knowledge about those local communities. I think, sometimes perhaps historically there was a tendency perhaps for head office to be slightly ivory tower and to feel that, it's the Wild West out there in the network. But actually, brands in the UK like Marks and Spencer's, which is, one of the heroes of our sort of local high street, they've empowered their local stores to run their own social media and have had fantastic results with it. Real improved relevancy, real engagement, but also engagement not just from customers, but from the stores themselves. These guys want to feel part of something, and if you allow them access and the tools and the trust, I think it can bring huge benefits to a national or a global brand.
I love the phrase tools and trust. It's a great, summation. So let's call it a day here, just because I want to make good use of your time, and we try to keep these to about 20 minutes. But clearly, this conversation about what's happening in local marketing and how can we facilitate that two-way street communication is something we should revisit soon. So Peter, thanks for taking time with us today, and we'll see you very soon.
Lovely. Good to see you all. And see you soon. Take care.